The dog came through the emergency doors at 2:17 in the morning, and the man carrying him could barely keep his feet under him. Jenna Baxter heard the automatic doors slide open before she saw them. She was at the nurse's station, finishing a discharge note on a broken wrist from Bay 4, and she looked up the way air nurses always look up, fast, assessing, already moving before her brain caught up with her body. The man was big, army boots, cargo pants, a gray t-shirt soaked dark on the left side where blood had soaked through from a gash on his ribs. His jaw was set so tight she could see the muscles working in his neck. But he wasn't looking at her or at the intake desk or at anything in the room. He was looking down at the animal in his arms. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, maybe 75 pounds, all muscle and fur, wearing a worn tactical vest that had seen real use. Its right front leg was wrapped in what looked like a strip of t-shirt, already soaked through. Its eyes were open, but glassy. The man was talking to it in a low voice, the kind of voice people use when they're trying to hold something together that's about to break apart. Jenna was already around the desk. "Sir, his name is Ghost." The man looked up. His eyes were pale blue, the kind of pale that comes from years of squinting into sun and wind and distance. "He's a military working dog, retired. He was with me for 2 tours. I need someone to help him." Jenna registered 3 things at once. The dog was going into shock, the man's own wound needed attention, and bringing an animal into the ER of Kessler Memorial Hospital was explicitly against policy, had been since she started working here 8 years ago. She pulled a pair of gloves from her pocket. "Bring him to Bay 2. The man, his name was Dale Tipton, she'd find out later, Staff Sergeant, 75th Ranger Regiment, 11 years of service, 2 Purple Hearts, didn't say thank you. He just turned and walked where she pointed, and she followed, pulling the curtain behind them. Ghost had a deep laceration on the right foreleg, down to the fascia. Something had caught him. Tipton would explain later. A piece of metal sheeting that had blown off a fence in the wind, completely random, the kind of thing that wasn't anyone's fault and didn't make it any easier to look at. The dog had lost blood. His gums were pale. His heart rate, when Jenna pressed 2 fingers gently to the inside of his thigh, was fast and weak. How long ago did this happen? 40 minutes. I drove straight here. Tipton was standing at Ghost's head, one hand resting on the dog's neck, and his voice was completely flat in the way that meant he was using everything he had just to keep it level. "He's your PTSD service dog?" "Was my MWD first. 8 years active. He ranked out above me for 3 of them. Something moved across Tipton's face. In the Rangers, the dog outranks the handler by 1 grade, keeps the handler from mistreating the animal. Ghost was a staff sergeant the same year I was still a corporal." He paused. "I owe him more than I can say." Jenna had already started irrigating the wound. She sent the tech on duty, a young man named Garrett, for suture supplies and a bag of saline, and Garrett went without asking questions, because he'd worked with Jenna long enough to know when she was in a mode where questions were irrelevant. She worked for 40 minutes. Ghost stayed still in the way that well-trained dogs stay still, trembling but trusting. Tipton never moved from his spot at the dog's head. His own wound had slowed to a seep. She made him press a gauze pad to it and promised she'd clean it properly once Ghost was stable, and he did what she said without argument. By the time she was tying off the last suture, Ghost's gums had pinked up. His tail moved once, just once, a slow sweep against the exam table, and Tipton made a sound that wasn't quite a word. It was almost 4 a.m. when Director Renee Stafford walked through the curtain of Bay 2. Jenna had known it was coming. The charge nurse, Cheryl Dodd, had stuck her head in around 3:15 with a look on her face that said she was, and also that she'd had no choice, and Jenna had nodded without stopping what she was doing. Stafford had been called. Of course she had. That was how it worked. Renee Stafford was in her late 50s, with silver hair she wore, pulled back tight, and the kind of posture that came from decades of believing she was always the most important person in any given room. She wore a blazer over a silk blouse at 4 in the morning, which told you something. Her expression, when she stepped around the curtain and took in the scene, the dog on the table, the suture supplies, the bloody gauze, went very still. "Ms. Baxter." Her voice was precise and completely without warmth, a word, outside. "He's stable," Jenna said. "Give me 2 minutes to—" "Now, please." The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Stafford laid it out with the efficiency of someone who had done this before: violation of health code regulations, violation of hospital policy exposure, contamination risk, the Joint Commission, insurance implications. Each point delivered cleanly, like items on a list. Jenna stood in the hallway outside Bay 2 and listened to all of it, and thought about Ghost's tail moving against the table. "You're aware," Stafford said, "that I have no choice here." Jenna looked at her. "You have a choice." Stafford's jaw tightened. "Your access badge will be deactivated as of this moment. Security will escort you to your locker to collect your personal belongings. Your final paycheck will be processed according to standard HR procedure." She glanced past Jenna toward the bay. "Arrangements will be made for the animal." Arrangements. Appropriate arrangements. The security guard's name was Frank. He'd worked the overnight shift at Kessler for years and had never once given Jenna any trouble. He walked with her to the staff locker room and waited outside the door while she opened her locker and took out her things: her wallet, her car keys, her phone, the fleece jacket she'd brought because the night shifts ran cold. She stood there for a moment looking at the inside of the locker. There was a photo stuck to the door with a piece of medical tape. Her and her sister at the Outer Banks, 3 summers ago, both of them laughing at something off camera. She peeled it off carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. Frank walked her to the main entrance. He didn't say anything, but at the door he held it open for her, and when she stepped through he said quietly, "I'm sorry, Ms. Baxter," and she believed him. She sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time. The sky was the particular dark blue that comes just before dawn, not quite black anymore, not yet gray. She could see the emergency entrance from where she was parked. She watched an ambulance pull in, watched the team move, watched the doors slide closed again. She'd done this for 8 years. She knew every sound that building made. She drove home. Brigadier General Arthur Wynne arrived at Kessler Memorial at 9:45 the next morning. He was not scheduled, and he was not announced, and when the woman at the front desk asked if she could help him, he said he was there to see a patient named Dale Tipton and that he knew the way. He was in service dress uniform with 2 rows of ribbons on his chest and a single star on each shoulder, and the woman at the front desk decided not to press the issue. He had his aide with him, a young captain named Ferraro, and 2 MPs who positioned themselves by the elevator without being asked. Wynne had been doing this kind of thing for a long time. He found Tipton in a room on the 3rd floor, sitting up in bed, Ghost lying on the floor beside him on a folded blanket that someone had placed there. The dog's bandaged leg was stretched out in front of him. His eyes tracked to the door when Wynne entered, assessed, relaxed. "General." Tipton moved to get up. "Stay." Wynne pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. He looked at Ghost for a moment. "They told me what happened to your leg, bud." Ghost's tail swept the blanket once. Wynne stayed for 40 minutes. In that time, Tipton told him most of it: the accident, driving to the ER, the nurse who hadn't hesitated, and then what happened after. He told it plainly, without editorializing, the way soldiers tell things. When he was done, there was a silence. "What's the nurse's name?" Wynne asked. Tipton told him. Wynne sat with that for a moment. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and told Tipton he'd be back. Renee Stafford's office was on the 4th floor, corner room, with a view of the parking structure and a slice of the tree line beyond it. She was on a call when her assistant knocked and opened the door without waiting, which her assistant had never done in 4 years, and she looked up with an expression that was about to become a reprimand. Brigadier General Arthur Wynne walked in and closed the door behind him. Stafford set the phone down. She stood up because something in the room required it. General Wynne. She knew who he was. Everyone at a hospital within 40 miles of Fort Liberty knew who he was. "I wasn't aware you had an appointment." "I don't." He stood in the center of her office and looked around it briefly, taking in the degrees on the wall, the hospital's mission statement framed in glass, the photo of Stafford shaking hands with a senator. Then he looked at her. "I want to talk to you about a nurse named Jenna Baxter." The color shifted slightly in Stafford's face. The termination was carried out in full compliance with, "I'm not a regulator, Director." His voice was calm and even. "I'm not here to cite you for anything. I'm here because a woman spent 40 minutes in your emergency department last night, saving the life of a combat veteran service animal, a dog that served this country for 8 years and has kept that veteran alive since he came home. And your response was to walk her out of the building at 4 in the morning." Stafford's chin came up. "With respect, General, what occurred last night was a serious violation of health code regulations and hospital policy. I am responsible for the safety and liability of this institution, and I made the decision that the situation— Ghost has 3 confirmed explosive detections on his service record." Wynn's voice didn't change in volume or temperature. He was retired from active duty after absorbing shrapnel that was meant for the 2 Rangers walking behind him. The VA classified his injuries as service-connected, same as they would for any soldier. The nurse who helped him last night understood what that meant. "You see liability. She saw a patient." Stafford said nothing. "Sergeant Tipton asked me not to make a scene." Wynn glanced toward the window. "He said, and I'm quoting him here, that he didn't want to cause trouble for a woman who'd been nothing but decent, so I'm going to take that into account." He looked back at her. "But I'm also going to make some calls. To your board, to the hospital's public affairs contact, to a few people I know at the Veterans Affairs Office who have been looking for exactly this kind of story to illustrate why veterans' service animals need clearer legal protections in civilian medical settings. I have a lot of time this week, and I have a lot of phone numbers." He let that sit. "Or," he said, "you call Jenna Baxter today, and you ask her to come back. You make it right. And I go back to doing my job, and you go back to doing yours, and we don't need to turn this into anything larger than it already is." Stafford stared at him for a long moment. The framed mission statement on the wall was visible just over her shoulder. "Compassionate care. Community first. Excellence in every encounter." She reached for her phone. Jenna was in her kitchen when her cell rang. She hadn't slept. She'd made coffee and sat at the table and watched the morning come through the window over the sink, and she'd thought about Ghost's gums going from white to pink, and the way Tipton's face had looked when the dog's tail moved, and she'd thought that she would do it again. She'd do it every time. The number on her screen was the main line for Kessler Memorial. She answered. Stafford's voice was different on the phone. Not soft, exactly. But something had gone out of it. The call was short. An acknowledgement that the termination had been, in Stafford's words, a response to policy violation that may not have adequately considered the full context of the situation. An offer of reinstatement, full back pay, no notation, in her file. A formal apology would follow in writing. Jenna sat at her kitchen table after the call ended and looked at her coffee cup. It had gone cold. She got up and poured it out and stood at the sink for a moment. She thought about calling her sister. She thought about calling Cheryl. She thought, strangely, about the photo she'd peeled off her locker door in the dark this morning. The one from the Outer Banks. The two of them laughing at something neither of them would probably be able to remember now. She thought about Ghost's tail. She went and got her keys. 3 weeks later, Dale Tipton walked through the front doors of Kessler Memorial Hospital at noon on a Tuesday. Ghost walked beside him, matching his pace, the healed leg moving without a hitch in his stride. The bandage was long gone. The tactical vest was back on. Jenna was coming off a morning shift when she saw them in the lobby. She stopped. Tipton raised a hand, not quite a wave, more of an acknowledgement, soldier to soldier, the kind of gesture that doesn't require any particular interpretation. She walked over. Ghost looked up at her and she let him sniff her hand, and his tail moved the same way it had moved on the table that night. Slow, deliberate, a fact being stated. "How's the leg?" she asked. She was looking at the dog, but Tipton knew she was asking about both of them. "Good," Tipton said, "both of us." She crouched down and put her hand on Ghost's neck, just behind the ear, the way she had when she was working on him, and the dog leaned into it slightly. 8 years in the field, 3 confirmed detections. Shrapnel in his side that had been meant for the men behind him. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "Yeah," Tipton was quiet for a moment. "I did." She stood up. The lobby was busy the way hospital lobbies are always busy. People coming and going, the elevator dinging, someone's name being called over the PA. the ordinary noise of a place that tries to hold things together. Jenna Baxter had 53 minutes before her next shift started. She had a locker with a photo back on the door, and a badge that still worked, and a name that was still on the schedule. She had the memory of pale gums going pink and the exact weight of what it meant to make a decision without knowing how it would end. She scratched Ghost one more time behind the ear. "Good boy," she said, and she meant it for both of them.